Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking on a massive, really complex topic that affects virtually every single American, whether you're already retired or, just entering the workforce. We're stripping away all the noise to look at the highly alarming 2026 headlines regarding the future of Social Security. The clock is ticking pretty loudly, and honestly, the math is getting increasingly daunting. So, is Social Security going bankrupt? It's literally the single biggest, most terrifying question on everyone's mind right now. You see it on the news, you read it in articles, but today, we're going to look at the hard data to see exactly what's happening under the hood of the nation's biggest safety net. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the ticking clock, then look at bankrupt versus insolvent, review the cost of inaction, and finally dive into a legislative failsafe called the Promise Act and how it's forcing Congress to act. Let's jump in. Section 1. The ticking clock. Let's look at these approaching deadlines. We're really dealing with two main timelines here. First, we have the 2026 Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, baseline. They predict insolvency is going to hit in 2032, which would lead to a really steep 28% cut in benefits. Then, on the other hand, the Social Security Trustees report projects insolvency in 2034 with a slightly lower but still devastating shortfall of roughly 20%. So the crucial takeaway here is that while these two really rigorous models differ slightly by a year or two, they are both flashing giant red warning lights. The cliff is approaching, and it's approaching fast.
All right, Section 2, bankrupt versus insolvent. Time to bust a major myth.
By definition, insolvency does absolutely not mean bankruptcy. Bankrupt kind of implies the money is completely gone and benefits just drop to zero, right? Well, actually, scratch that. That is not what's happening here. Insolvency is just a financial state where the trust fund reserves are depleted, but revenues are actually still flowing in every single day from the payroll taxes of active workers. Those daily taxes are just only enough to cover a percentage of the promised benefits, say 75 or 80%, but definitely not zero. To back this up, we have a statement from AARP. They clearly state Social Security isn't going bankrupt, but Congress needs to act to protect and strengthen it now and in the future. They're reassuring us that earned benefits won't just vanish into thin air, but they're also drawing a firm line in the sand. Severe cuts are absolutely coming if legislative intervention doesn't happen, like immediately. Section 3, the cost of inaction. Let's talk about the real-world stakes. 71 million. I want you to really absorb that number for a second. That is the sheer scale of this issue. Today, more than 71 million Americans rely on this program. We're not talking about some niche government grant. We are talking about the literal bedrock of American retirement. For 43% of seniors, Social Security provides the vast majority of their income. We're talking about more than 25 million families who rely on this money to pay for rent, electricity, groceries, and essential medications. If this slice of the pie takes a hit, the ripple effects through the economy and millions of households are gonna be catastrophic. And that hit could come as soon as 2032. That's the year the CBO projects the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will run completely dry. Think about that. That's just 6 years away from the 2026 data we're looking at. The window to fix this? It's no longer a distant problem for future generations. It is an immediate crisis right now. If that 2032 deadline hits without a fix, the law actually requires an automatic benefit cut. Depending on the model you're looking at, that cut triggers instantly at somewhere between 22 and 28% across the board. The program simply cannot legally pay out more than it takes in. Let's translate that abstract percentage into a very punchy, tangible reality. According to projections by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a cut of that magnitude is the equivalent of a roughly $500 monthly loss for today's retirees. Imagine suddenly taking $500 out of the monthly budget of someone living on a fixed income. It's a devastating prospect, for sure. And the CRFB offers an incredibly stark warning to politicians about this. They point out that promising not to touch Social Security is just an implicit endorsement of a 22% across-the-board benefit cut. So the crucial point here is that political paralysis, the fear of touching the third rail of politics, is actually a guaranteed path to slashing benefits. Inaction is an action. Of course, there are multiple perspectives on how to actually solve this. To ensure we're looking impartially at all sides, here's the conservative perspective from the Economic Policy Innovation Center, or EPIC. They argue that reforms should focus on reducing long-term tax burdens on Americans and introducing personal ownership options, rather than simply expanding government dependency. It really highlights the deeply ideological divide over how to fix the math, which is exactly why Congress has been so stuck. Moving to Section 4. Enter the Promise Act, a bipartisan failsafe. This bill is sponsored by a thoroughly bipartisan group of heavy hitters in the Senate, including Senators Cassidy, Cornyn, Durbin, Kaine, King, and Tillis. Now, what's vital to understand here is that the Promise Act doesn't actually dictate specific tax hikes or benefit cuts itself. Instead, it's a procedural mechanism. It's specifically designed to bypass the usual political gridlock by forcing a strict, legally binding legislative process. Section 5. Forcing Congress to act. Let's break down the legislative plan. Let's walk through the exact mechanics of the Promise Act. Step 1. A bipartisan 7-member Social Security Advisory Board, or SSAB, is legally tasked with drafting a base bill that guarantees solvency for the next 50 years. Step 2. That bill is fast-tracked directly to House and Senate committees. It literally cannot be ignored or buried in a desk somewhere. And Step 3. To actually become law, it requires a 3/5 majority in the Senate and a simple majority in the House. But what if the advisory board simply can't agree on a bill? Well, there's a built-in backup plan. If the SSAB fails, the House and Senate majority leaders are allowed to submit their own base bill. And if they won't do it, literally any bipartisan pair of lawmakers can step up and submit a bill. The entire goal here is to ensure a reform bill absolutely makes it to the floor for a vote, no matter what happens. Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois and one of the bill's sponsors, sums up the urgency perfectly. He says, "The longer Congress waits, the more difficult it will be to address this issue in the future. Every single day that goes by without a solution means the eventual fixes, whether they're tax increases or benefit adjustments, will just have to be that much more extreme." So, to recap the ultimate goals of this whole reform process, it's designed to definitively stop that terrifying 2032 or 2034 insolvency countdown. It actively prevents those automatic, devastating 22 to 28% benefit cuts. It aims to secure the system for current and future generations for the next 50 years. And most importantly, by its very design, it absolutely requires bipartisan compromise to succeed. The demographic reality of an aging America is here. The mechanisms for a solution, like the Promise Act, are sitting right on the table. The clock is loudly ticking. The only question left is, will Congress keep the promise before the alarm goes off? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.